Canada is the home of the brave and land of the free. The government is fair and encourages diversity and inclusivity. Canada is the best country in the world. Canada is so innocent and lovable, right? Not so fast. Canadians and people around the world, for that matter, often forget or avoid talking about Canada's dark past. A dark past that includes assimilation, neglect, violence, and disrespect towards a single cultural group. Aboriginal peoples are the group that Canada and the Canadian government continue to disrespect, more specifically, Indigenous women and girls. For example, Aboriginal women and girls are 3 times more likely than non-Aboriginals to have been victims of violent crime. This is just one example of how the government has not done justice for the missing and murdered Aboriginal women and their families. The government is to blame because of the lack of urgency when investigating the disappearances of missing Native women. The government has conducted sparse inquiries that have led to no resolution and no answers for the Aboriginal community. For example, when Justin Trudeau was elected Prime Minister in 2015, he gave First Nations a false sense of hope.
There have been a number of different initiatives put forward somewhat piecemeal across the country. I believe that there is a need for a national public inquiry to bring justice for the victims, healing for the families, and to put an end to this tragedy.
However, about 2 years after the election, the inquiry is no longer a priority and the responses from the government have been few and far between. Since 1996, there have been at least 29 official inquiries and over 500 recommendations for action, but none have been successful nor acted upon. What message does it send to the families who are still grieving? What does it say to Canadians about how this can be stopped? Since 1980, there have been 1,181 Aboriginal women who have gone missing and haven't been found. 35 Aboriginal women are victims of homicides every year. Would the government handle cases involving other cultural groups differently? White, Asian, African American, Muslim? If atrocities were to occur to any of these races, it would be primetime news. People would call for justice. People would want answers. Canadians would want the government to stand up and make sure that any act of violence would be prevented in the future. When was the last time you saw a story about a missing and murdered Aboriginal woman on the news? Never mind primetime news. The answer is never. The sad reality is that despite of all the acts of violence against First Nations women, the government continues to push this issue to the background. The Canadian government continues to provide no justice for the missing and murdered Aboriginal women.
No one from the National Inquiry has called or contacted us. They take the information and leave with no aftercare. This is not trauma-informed. So I ask, 100 years from now, will you be looked at as a Prime Minister who changed the course of Canada's relationship with Indigenous people? Or will you be seen as yet another politician in the very long list of politicians who simply peddled in the age-old craft of empty promises?
Imagine the families who still have no answers, no closure, no justice for their loved ones. Now, as people who live in Canada, we should be proud to be Canadian. However, Canada is not as innocent as one might think it is. Canada has a dark past and a shadow that continues to cover society and Aboriginal peoples. In 2017, it is getting harder and harder to see the light of justice.